Hello everyone. Today we are going to talk about the tide rises, the tide falls together. First, I will introduce you the poet. Secondly, I will analyze the poem for you. Thirdly, I will also cover the history context. Finally, we will watch a reading aloud video I downloaded from the internet. Let's get started. First, about the poet. Henry Wadsworth Longfellow was born on February the 27th, 1807, in Portland, while Maine was still a part of Massachusetts. Henry Wadsworth Longfellow grew up in the thriving coastal city he remembered in My Lost Youth, written in 1856, for his wolves and woodlands, the ships and sailors from distant lands who sparked his boyish imagination, and the historical associations of its old fort and an 1813 offshore naval battle between American and British brig. He was one of the most widely known and best-loved American poets of the 19th century. He achieved a level of national and international prominence previously unequaled in the literary history of the United States, and is one of the few American writers honored in the Poets' Corner of Westminster Abbey. In fact, he is believed to be the first, as his bust was installed there in 1884. Longfellow's achievements in fictional and non-fictional prose, in a striking variety of poetic forms and modes, and in translation from many European languages, resulted in a remarkably productive and influential literary career. His celebrity in his own time, however, he yielded to the changing literary tastes and to reactions against the general tradition of authorship he represented. Even if time has proved him something less than the master poet he never claimed to be, Longfellow made pioneering contributions to American literary life by exemplifying the possibility of a successful authorial career by linking American poetry to European traditions beyond England, and by developing a surprisingly wide readership for Romantic poetry. Secondly, the analysis of the poem. In the first stanza of "The tide rises, the tide falls", the speaker begins by making use of the line that is used as refrain and as the title. It is a good example of caesura, the emphasis of which is all the more pronounced due to the uneven meter of the lines. Whenever this line appears, a reader is confronted with the reversal of stressed and unstressed beats. The statement is simple and one that the speaker makes without any room for doubt. The same can be said for the second statement, although the information being relayed is more detailed. This time, the speaker draws the reader's attention to the curlew, or a type of shorebird that will live by the rising and falling tide. Longfellow has already provided the reader with a good example of imaginary. These two lines tap into multiple human senses at once. Someone is walking in the next lines along the edge of the water. In the sea sands, they are damp and brown, and the traveler is moving quickly. He is heading towards town quickly. The speaker's destination and his intentions are unclear. The last line refrains the refrain. It is here at the end of each line the reader will encounter the refrain. The tide continues to rise and fall no matter what day it is, the events occurring in the wider world, or who is hurrying along the beach. In the second stanza, the speaker brings in the darkness that was hinted at in the first stanza. Time is progressing and now it is full dark. There's a good example of personification. In the second line, where the poet describes the sea as calling in the darkness. This is a mysterious and haunting image, made more so by the repetition of the sea. The sound that it's making, its calls, could refer to the splashing of water on the shore. Personification is used again in the next lines as he describes the waves and how they reach out, seemingly with hands, to grasp the footprints in the sand. This is very unusual and evocative image, clearly relates to the poem and the movement of the sea to the passage of time. The hands of the waves, an image representing the foam, wipe away the footprints. It erases the presence of any who walk along the shore. In the last stanza of the In the final stanza of the Tara sees the tide force, the speaker lifts the darkness of, of the night, a symbol for death, and brings in the morning. It breaks through the darkness in the form of horses, steeds in their stalls. It is important for its rise through the sky. The horses stamp and neigh, and the ostler, or someone who is employed to look after horses, is calling to them. There is still life in amongst this landscape that was so recently filled with darkness. Just as the tide rises and sets the darkness returns to the shore, but the traveler does not. He has been taken by death, his print erased from the shore. Thirdly, the history context. Longfellow's wife provided many occasions to reflect on mortality. For example, both of his wives died under tragic circumstances. The first, Mary, after a miscarriage; the second, Francis, in a freak household fire in which he too was badly burnt. Both tragedies sent him into spells of terrible grief. He confessed in his sonnet "The Cross of Snow", written 18 years after Frances' death, that he had never gotten over losing her. The Tide Rises, the Tide Falls, published 3 years after "The Cross of Snow", emerges from this same period of protracted mourning. It also features a vanished traveler, so perhaps it's relevant that Mary died while traveling abroad. Readers can also echo of the time in which Longfellow writes in the poem's references to steeds, stalls, and the ostler. In Longfellow's time, an ostler was similar to valet at a modern hotel or restaurant. Ostlers supervised stables, especially in inns, where they tended to guests' horses. In the poem, the appearance of the ostler and impatient steeds indicates that at least some people in town are getting ready to leave for somewhere. The implication that the traveler is not among them because the traveler's journey, which is to say his life, has ended. History context might also suggest some practical, as opposed to purely symbolic, reasons for hurrying to reach a town by nightfall. Before electric lighting became widespread in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, streets were often poorly lit, so towns were less active and more dangerous at night. Transportation was also more limited in the later hours. After all, horses didn't have electric headlights. In other words, while the poem's traveler may be racing toward a metaphorical appointment with the darkness, travelers in general, in Longfellow's day, would have been even more inclined than their modern counterparts to reach their destination by evening, after twilight. There are fewer things to do, fewer ways to get around, and more ways to get hurt. This is all for today. Let's watch a video of reading aloud to end the presentation. Hope you have a nice day.
The tide rises, the tide falls. The twilight darkens, the curlew calls. Along the sea sands, damp and brown, the traveler hastens toward the town. And the tide rises, the tide falls. Darkness settles on roofs and walls, but the sea in the darkness calls. The little waves with their soft, white hands efface the footprints in the sands. And the tide rises, the tide falls. The morning breaks, the steeds in their stalls stamp and neigh as the hostler calls. The day returns, but never more returns the traveler to the shore. And the tide rises, the tide falls.